of experience. I think if you began your sound check with "she sells seashells down by the seashore," you'll probably get the best result because apparently the S's are the most difficult. So, good afternoon, colleagues. Merry Christmas, Bon Année. We're all hoping for a better 2021. I apologize that apparently I ran into some colleagues and I'm the Grinch that stole Christmas because all the other committees adjourned for today. So, but let's have an efficient meeting and one where we will be collegial and in the Christmas spirit. And we have a little business to clear up at the end of the meeting. I don't know if we'll need to go into camera, but we will if we need to. But for now, we're going to continue on with our two panels. And our first witness is Simon Kennedy. He's the Deputy Minister for Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. And so, Mr. Kennedy, I think you've already been informed. You have up to 7 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we'll go to, I think you know the drill, and then it will be questions and answers. Please commence.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll just pull my opening remarks up. I'll be very brief here. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. It is my pleasure to appear before this committee as it studies issues of conflict of interest and the Lobbying Act in relation to pandemic spending. Tout comme l'ensemble des ministères qui ont été appelés à protéger.
Just as all departments have been called on to protect Canadians and our economy during this extraordinary time, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada has been hard at work, doing its part to help deliver a strong, immediate and effective response. The integrity and commitment displayed by ISCD employees as we develop and implement pandemic programming has been exemplary.
The Canadian industry attracted more than 6,600 companies, all offering their expertise and capacity to help combat COVID-19. I believed the ministry that I'm in charge of moved swiftly to work with these companies. In fact, in a very short period, we went from sourcing barely any of our personal protective equipment domestically, for example, to sourcing approximately 40% of the total value of COVID-19 related PPE contracts in Canada. So this is a significant pivot by Canadian industry. And we were very proud to help facilitate that by shifting the focus, for example, of our business innovation programming to concentrate directly on COVID-19. I'm talking here about programs such as the Strategic Innovation Fund, the Innovation Superclusters, Innovative Solutions Canada, and the National Research Council's Industrial Research Assistance Program. And with all hands on deck, we aim to expedite the evaluation and approval of projects so that they could get off the ground quickly to address the most urgent issues. Without a doubt, the groundwork that we laid in previously establishing collaborative innovation programs really set us up to respond quickly and successfully. Of course, the best way to end this pandemic is with a safe and effective vaccine and related medical countermeasures. And so, Mr. Chair, we solicited the participation of industry and identified medical experts to lead independent task forces for vaccines and therapeutics, respectively. In doing so, we gained insight into very technical subject matter and received invaluable advice as the government moved to fund related projects in a timely manner. I'd like to commend my own staff for their action in securing access to needed supplies and to working with colleagues in other ministries to secure access to vaccine candidates for Canadians. Monsieur le Président, dans tous ces cas, Innovation, Sciences et Développement économique Canada et ses fonctionnaires ont agi avec transparence, ont offert leur aide et ont proposé des solutions aux plus grands défis que nous ayons jamais eu à relever au cours de notre vie. Je peux affirmer sans hésiter que
Monsieur le Président, rappel au règlement, je suis désolé.
Nous allons vérifier que les canaux soient corrigés.
Président, je pense que je suis à la fin de mes remarques d'introduction.
Je suis à la fin de mon mot d'ouverture. C'est un plaisir de...
I will conclude my remarks there, and I will be very happy to try to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. We're just working on translation now, but I'll go to our first questioner as they're working on it, Mr. Workington, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kennedy, you met with Mr. MacNaughton, is that correct?
Madam Chair, I attended a meeting at which Mr. MacNaughton was present, but I did not actually speak with or correspond with Mr. MacNaughton, but I was at a meeting that he was at. Yes, I was invited there by colleagues for a demonstration of software.
So you were there to witness the meeting. What was the date of that meeting? Was it April the 3rd?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, Mr. Chair. I attended a meeting on April 3rd, 45 minutes. It was like a Zoom call, kind of one of these video conferences with a number of other people that was hosted by Palantir. Mr. MacNaughton and a number of other of his colleagues were in attendance.
So at the height of the concern about the pandemic spreading into Canada, your department was dropping everything to meet with Palantir. What was the nature of that meeting?
Well, Madam Chair, maybe I could just provide a little bit of context. I think it might be helpful for.
Well, if I know I only have 6 minutes, so I'd like to know exactly what the.
I'll be very brief, sir, but it's directly relevant to your question. So one of the things we did in responding to the pandemic, we had a kind of a call to action for Canadian industry and companies that wish to help out. And in that call, we had almost 200 kind of digital service firms and software firms, very large companies, very small, large multinationals, kind of SMEs, step forward and make offers to provide assistance pro bono. Palantir was part of these, this large number of companies that stepped forward. We actually met with more than 60. In fact, there were so many offers. I actually designated a couple of staff to just follow up with each of the groups that came to us. So, for example, when I was contacted by Palantir, initially I passed them off to this group that I'd created, and so we were actually meeting with many firms, and not just software companies, but actually, manufacturing operations and other organizations, even distilleries that wanted to make hand sanitizer. The attitude was leave no stone unturned. If somebody was coming saying they thought they could offer something, we certainly were willing to hear them out. And so that's what we did with Palantir. Is I attended a meeting, and my staff attended a meeting with some of the staff from Palantir to kind of assess their offer.
Well, this is what concerns, I think, a lot of Canadians, is that while there were hundreds of companies that were prepared to step up and help, it seems that Mr. MacNaughton got special access. He was able to leapfrog from being just simply a person who inquired, as hundreds, if not thousands, of companies did, to a point where he was meeting with you and other senior executives within your department. So my question is was Mr. MacNaughton at that meeting, and did you know that he would be at that meeting when it was first initiated?
Well, Madam Chair, I certainly checked my records. I knew that I'd be getting questions about this. He was on the invitation list among a number of other people that would be at the meeting. So yes, I think it's fair to say that I would have known that he would have been there. But if I can just indicate, I want to.
Were you or members of your department aware that he was at that point the former ambassador?
I was aware that he was a former ambassador. Absolutely. How could I not be?
Well, that is, I guess, the concern is not only did you know that he was a former ambassador, but that he would be required by the ethics code to refrain from lobbying. You were aware of that, as everybody within government would be aware of. Why was he invited to lobby when everybody around the table knew that he was violating the provisions of the code and the act?
Well, I think I just have to go back to what I said earlier, which is we had many thousands of firms contact us. It was our practice when firms contacted us offering help to kind of take that at face value and have an initial meeting. We had an initial meeting with Palantir.
So even if they were prepared to break the rules, you were prepared at that point to break the rules.
I have to say, Madam Chair, I think that those questions are best directed to Mr. MacNaughton and his colleagues. I was not invited to a meeting by Mr. MacNaughton. I attended a meeting that was suggested by Palantir, At the conclusion of the meeting, we actually told them, I said directly, I did not think that their software actually had use for us. And I directed them to private sector players in the industry because their proposal actually seemed kind of too sophisticated for the kinds of needs that we had. So we took a courtesy meeting, as we did with like dozens of other companies in the specific software and digital services space. We told them at the end of the meeting that, thank you very much. We did not really see any utility for their particular offer, and we directed them on their way, as we have done with many other companies that we have met with. So
did anybody at the meeting, either at the staff level or members that were at the meeting, ever elevate concerns about the conflict of interest concern with regards to speaking directly to Mr. MacNaughton, knowing his former position?
I was at a meeting to see a demonstration of this company's software. So, we did not have a discussion about doing business with the company. It was to sort of understand more of their capabilities.
So there were thousands of companies that were ready to step up. How is it that he got onto the short list?
Well, Madam Chair, maybe I could just reiterate. There was no short list. We actually made a practice, including for those thousands of companies I mentioned, of being systematic and getting back to each one with a phone call or some sort of, return engagement. We met with, I think, probably more than 1,000 of the 6,000 directly. And, at the end of the day, only obviously a smaller number would have actually done business with the government. But it was our practice to kind of meet everybody and get a sense of what the capabilities were. And at the end of the day, I participated in a brief meeting with Palantir where we politely told them that they didn't have anything to offer us.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy, by the way, I'm not offended whatsoever, but just for the blues, maybe you should call me Mr. Chair rather than Madam Chair, and then that way there'd be.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I'm
looking at the clerk here on the screen.
all I'm saying is that
I apologize, sir. Absolutely.
In the transcript, people would get confused. That's all.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry about that.
No.
I was looking at the clerk. Yeah. My apologies.
Like I said,
Thank you, Mr. Sweet.
I'm not offended whatsoever.
No. But you could be if you wish to be. I apologize.
That's okay. Okay, that's all the time for that questioner. Now we're going to go to Mr. Sarbera for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody, and welcome Deputy Minister Kennedy. It is the Friday afternoon, the last day of sitting, and Ethics Committee is definitely doing its job today. Mr. Kennedy, first of all, how long have you served as a Deputy Minister in your role at ISED?
I've been in this role, Mr. Chair, just over a year at ISED. It's my second term in the department. I was a senior associate deputy minister in the department about 10 years ago or so. So about 3 years and a bit in total, but 1 year in this particular role.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your service in this most unique and extraordinary period of time that our country has faced and the world has faced. You indicated in your opening remarks that there's a strong relationship between the private sector and your department, and that ISED's ability and willingness to engage with businesses is critical to ISED's ability to deliver on its mandate. Can you expand on this and tell us what changed during the pandemic? For example, the SIF program changed from one mandate to another. If you can explain that, that'd be great.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would say that, ISED's role is one that involves extensive engagement with industry. So in addition to working directly with firms, for example, to help them with the development of technology, to support their business plans, we also have to engage with firms regularly to understand better Canadian industry so that, for example, if there's a crisis or if something happens, we actually have knowledgeable civil servants who actually know the companies, know the management teams, have a sense of the financial strength and the capabilities of the firms, because that's actually important information that the government might need. So in the case of the pandemic, as an example, we were able to bring some of that expertise to bear in a couple of ways. So one of them was we have a variety of programs to assist the industry. So not just in my ministry specifically, but in the broader portfolio, the ISED portfolio, we have the Industrial Research Assistance Program that I think many members would know about, that is run by the National Research Council. We have the Strategic Innovation Fund that is run by my organization. We have Innovative Solutions Canada. We have a whole host of programming that supports business. A lot of that programming had to be adjusted rapidly and pivoted because of the pandemic for a couple of reasons. One is obviously firms, for example, that receive repayable contributions. So we made a significant, contribution for them to develop a new business line or new technology. But then if that's successful, they kind of repay the Crown, they repay the taxpayer over time. We maybe had to adjust the schedule of repayments because some of those firms are facing serious, financial issues. So I guess the bottom line, maybe, because I know you may wish to ask other questions, we actually deal with business kind of as a matter of routine, day in and day out, across a wide range of areas. I personally, speak to a lot of business people and receive solicitations and requests, literally daily, and that's just part of our business.
If I can just do a quick follow-up question, on your remarks to date. Is it practice that within the department that you consult with stakeholders on relevant legislation and government programs that you may be considering?
Yes, I would say, Mr. Chair, that's practice. Sometimes that might be informal. You're just kind of, taking a sounding. Other times we'll have a formal consultation. We'll put a paper out, but that's very much routine.
Yes, and since the pandemic has began effectively really in the beginning of the year, and the government rolled out a number of emergency programs to help Canadian workers and help Canadian businesses, would you say that lobbying has increased in your department?
I think, Mr. Chair, it's hard for me to, unquestionably by the nature of our organization, we are lobbied extensively. If you look at the lobbying commissioner's reports, ISET is always near the top of the list. Certainly our engagement with industry has gone up even higher during the pandemic. So I think the conjecture is probably accurate. Probably actually there has been an intensification of our engagement since the pandemic, but I want to just maybe mention to members, we're already an organization that deals extensively with the private sector and gets lobbied frequently.
Okay. And just to follow up, if I can just go to the SIF program, if you can elaborate on how that program was transitioned or pivoted to assist in getting PPE or specialized equipment, working with Canadian companies to ensure that Canadians were kept safe during the pandemic.
Well, the government announced additional funding for the SIF to support the government's efforts to respond to COVID-19. So there have been a number of very large investments that have been made through SIF. I could give a couple of examples.
Sure,
one would be in Medicago of Quebec City. Medicago is a Canadian, vaccine company with a very promising vaccine, and they received a contribution of $173 million through the SIF program to build out domestic biomanufacturing capacity. There have been other investments like that through SIF. The other thing that it was done was we worked very closely with all of our existing clients who have received SIF contributions to basically try to protect the Crown's investment and make sure those companies were able to bridge to the other side. So we would look at their repayment schedules. We would look at, whether they were experiencing financial distress and look at how we could maybe adjust their agreements so that they could bridge to the other side of the pandemic. So SIF has pivoted to focus on support for large-scale biomanufacturing and other, production of materials needed to protect Canadians. And also, we have pivoted some of the way in which we administer SIF to try to provide relief to companies so that we're not, frankly, we're not having a government program be part of the reason they may be facing solvency problems.
Thank you very much. That's all the time.
Thank you. I think my time is up. Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Mr. Kennedy, just we swim in an ocean of acronyms, but there may be a small cadre of people listening. SIF, could you tell us the acronym of SIF, please?
Yes, I apologize. It's the Strategic Innovation Fund. It's our major industry support program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maintenant, prochaine députée, Madame.
Next, Madame Goudreau for 6 minutes. Good morning, Mr. Deputy Minister. It's a pleasure to see you on this Friday. Well, let me explain to you the reason why I have a few questions. Well, it has been a few weeks and a few months too. I'm newly elected, and I did my homework, and I learned about the rules and laws, and especially when being part of the ethics committee. There are a lot of restrictions, and we need to be extremely careful. I don't doubt your professionalism at all, but for me, it is very important to shed light whether we are in pandemics or not. As I said to my children, there is an emergency, but the choice to cross the street during red light, well, you have to be extremely careful anyway. So I have a few questions to know a little bit more. What I understand from what you said is that you knew that Mr. MacNaughton was a public office holder. Yes, I knew he was the ambassador to the United States. Very good. Do you know Section 33 of the post-mandate rules? Well, I know that there are some restriction, that is to say, public office holder cannot do lobbying. Is this what you're talking about? Yes, well, we are talking about orders. And I wanted to know whether you knew this section of the law. Well, I know the different rules, but the very specific reference to a specific section, I would need the documents in front of me. But yes, I understand the rules you're describing, yes. Well, I would like to know, because of the work you do and the fact that you engage with the private sector, always, to help Canadians and Quebecers, I would like to know what is the procedure for due diligence. Oh, I understand. I was a bit confused about what you were asking. Well, we have processes for due diligence to verify all contracts. We have somebody studying the contract to see, especially if we want to go ahead with the contract. So they verify everything. They check everything with everything that has to do with the law. And we want to make sure that before signing anything, that all the processes are followed. And there's a member of my team that is responsible for managing contracts. And for more important contracts, we have a lot of different processes for this. We have to double check a lot of things before we actually sign the contract and go ahead with it, because we know at the end of the road it's very important to well manage the taxpayers' money. But do you agree with me for saying that when there's a crisis, and when it's important to make decisions very quickly, well, it's even more important to be very clear with what we do with taxpayer money. So I wanted to make sure that the way you verify all this, or you double check all this, is very clear, because there wouldn't be any incidents if everything would have been checked on the list. Well, I'm very comfortable that we have good processes, even during an emergency or during the pandemics. We always apply the rules. And it's not because there is an emergency that we don't apply the rules. We always use the rules and apply them. But sometimes it's important to make the decision with perhaps a little bit less information that we would love to have. And during the crisis, we don't know what's going on tomorrow. We don't know the nature of the pandemics. We don't know exactly what we would need. Yes, exactly. Well, Mr. Kennedy, I just have a few seconds, and I have a question that I would like to pose to you. According to you, what should be done to demonstrate that the work has been well done, and to erase the the impression of conflict of interest, saying that everything has been done with due diligence, according to rules, etc. So what could be done to do this? Because otherwise we wouldn't be here today to talk about it. Well, we have a certain steps we're following. Well, first of all, we need a good documentation to document the way the decision was taken. And we need to keep all this, the documentation, to have a good story of why we're making this decision, because it's possible that in the future the Auditor General will ask us, why did you decide this? And we need to be able to justify the decision. So sometimes it's necessary to decide fast, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to actually justify and okay.
An extra few seconds to finish it. Now we're on to Mr. Bachrach, a very famous musical name, that's for sure. And welcome to the committee, Mr. Bachrach.
That Bachrach has an extra vowel in the middle, and somewhere along the line we lost that extra A. But thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for appearing today. I wanted to pick up on this April 3rd meeting and start by asking, you mentioned that you were invited by colleagues to that meeting. Who exactly set up that meeting?
The Public Services Ministry.
Okay,
Public
was
Service
that
and Procurement?
So Minister Bain's office didn't have anything to do with setting up that meeting for you?
There were only, I went diligently through my records, and I can just inform the committee, there were only 2 meetings involving, at the officials level that I'm aware of, certainly, only 2 meetings that involved me or my staff. The meeting that I attended, which I described earlier, and then a meeting that my staff, who are in charge of kind of digital and data, had with Palantir staff. So those are the only 2, and the one that you're mentioning is the one that I attended.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that this meeting was a result of the call that went out to industry, and that many, many companies responded to that call. When was that call to industry issued?
Mr. Chair, I don't remember the specific date, but it would have been sometime in March. And to be frank, we also had, there was a website, kind of an official website we set up with an address, and you could fill in, details about what your offer was. Like, you could actually go online and say, I'm a manufacturer, and I can make, masks and so on. And you'd leave your contact detail, and we get back to you. So thousands came in that way. There were also a lot of other firms, Mr. Chair, that contacted us directly. I cannot tell you at this point whether Palantir might have. I certainly received an email directly from an official, not Mr. MacNaughton to be clear, but a staffer at Palantir saying, hey, we'd like to put our hand up. I don't know whether they came in through the Made in Canada portal as well, but everybody who came in, whether it was kind of with a direct email or through the portal, they all got kind of streamed into this system we had. We even set up, we even had like we had a tracking system, because there were so many people coming offering their help that we had to kind of keep track of everybody and make sure we called them back.
So, Mr. Kennedy, did you know that your minister and your minister's chief of staff had been in contact with Mr. MacNaughton when you took this meeting April 3rd?
No. I mean, obviously there was the report of Mr. Dion that talked about various officials and political staff, but at the time, certainly, this was just another company among the, frankly, thousands that were pouring in, kind of looking to help out. And, it was not like, it didn't stand out as like, oh my goodness, this is some special company. It was very routine. We treated it in the same kind of routine way we treated others. I sent them to the staff I had who were kind of tracking this kind of stuff to check them out.
But so this is a routine meeting, but you get into this meeting, you get onto Zoom, and there's Mr. MacNaughton. He's a very well-known person in government. You know that he's the former ambassador to the United States. You know about the Ethics Act. You know about the rules. Did it ever cross your mind that maybe you shouldn't be in that Zoom meeting?
I would say, Mr. Chair, that maybe just by way of context, that, again, as I noted earlier, ISET is an organization that interacts with hundreds and, in fact, thousands of businesses. It has been my experience, not just at Health, but in all of my other ministries, if you are dealing regularly with the business community, whether as a regulator, as in our case, a regulator and a funder, management teams, their boards, typically there is often some crosswalk to people who have, been a former political actor, been a former MP, and that is
Mr. Kennedy,
I would say that's true across the aisle. Like my experience has been, it is very difficult.
If I may,
absolutely.
do you feel that you bear some responsibility for also ensuring that those ethics rules get followed?
I certainly, Mr. Chair, make it my kind of absolute rule to try to follow the rules to the letter and make sure that I behave in a way that is ethical. And I would say I and my senior civil service colleagues take that very seriously. We know, frankly, how it can lead to significant heartache for a government, but also we know that it can be very disruptive to the operations of our ministry. So I'm quite fastidious about that. As I say,
after that meeting, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner ordered you not to meet with Mr. MacNaughton. Knowing that now, in hindsight, do you regret participating in that Zoom meeting that he was present on?
I think if I had known that there was a breach of the rules going on, I would have declined to attend. I think that's pretty obvious, and I think that would have been the default position of most of my colleagues. As I say, I meet with a lot of
familiarity with the Ethics Act and despite your familiarity with Mr. MacNaughton, the thought never crossed your mind when you were on that Zoom call that maybe there was a breach of the Ethics Act going on.
I would just maybe, Mr. Chair, indicate that I think questions about, whether rules were broken are best directed to those where that is at issue. In my case, I followed all of the rules that we normally follow. I deal with hundreds of businesses a year. I've dealt routinely with businesses that have, where there are former politicians and others, whether from both sides of the aisle, from different governments over time. The obligation to actually ensure you're following the rules is actually on the lobbyist, not on the person being lobbied. Many times, individuals are listed in the lobbying register, but it'll be the CEO of the organization, but it'll be one of their staff actually doing the lobbying. And other times they hire a professional lobbyist. Even if you check the lobbying register, it can be, this is an obligation that is on the person doing the lobbying, not on me. And as I say, I attended a meeting with maybe a dozen other people on a video screen. At the conclusion of the meeting, we politely said that we saw no further cause to follow up with them. That was the extent of the meeting.
That's all the time that we have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Kennedy. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Now we're going to move on to our second round. That's pour 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Mr. Gould. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for being here. It is odd to note, economic development countries, Canada is an organization I'm familiar with. I've done about 500 ads for them, and they have helped companies to increase productivity and production to help the cause after the Prime Minister's call to action. And Canada was buying inputs, masks, disinfectants abroad. Yesterday, I asked a question in the House, and CBC was reporting this week that Canada had bought $570 million worth of disinfectant from other countries and only $100 million from Canadian companies who could have produced more. So I have an example in my riding, a small business which was already making farm disinfectant and changed the recipe modestly, but they had to be certified by Health Canada to be able to sell this disinfectant to people. And that took a certain amount of time. They invested in the company to increase their production capacity with the hope of obtaining contracts with the Canadian government. And ultimately, they got zero, absolutely none. During this time, we've been buying $250 million worth of disinfectant from China, from a plant that was making car parts and changed everything in a couple of weeks with a recipe that was never certified by Health Canada. It came here in containers. It invaded the disinfectant market. We don't know if it was a good or not good product. And we had health-certified Canadian disinfectant that we can't sell to Canadians by Procurement Canada. So can you explain to me, all of this disinfectant imports into Canada, were they certified with the same standards and criteria as those that were produced in Canada? Mr. Chair, I think the best answer to the question would have to come from my Health Canada colleagues and perhaps the departments of procurement. I could only
tell you about my own experience. When we worked with Canadian industry as a department, ISED, it was almost impossible to obtain all the products that the people needed in Canada or abroad. There was a lack of production globally. So our interest was to protect Canadians and to obtain what we could get from any place. And it was necessary in our experience to move the Canadian industry to be able to produce these products. And as I said at the beginning, we began with zero production, and now we have nearly half, 40%. So our ISED experience was very encouraging to us. It was necessary. Individual choices of companies, why was something being brought abroad versus in Canada? That question I can't answer directly, unfortunately. But we were very proud of the Canadian industry efforts. And my experience is that we engage with industry because we needed those products. Thank you. Economic Development Canada received additional funding to increase productivity of Canadian business to assist in fighting the pandemic. How much did Economic Development Canada receive in additional funding, and was that money distributed by sector? Did each regional office get a share, and were they able to use it as they wished? Or was there a particular focus which was coming from the head office for all the regions? I apologize, Chair. I'm not directly responsible for Economic Development Canada, and it's in the portfolio of ISED, but it's not. I'm not the one who manages. I'd be happy to speak to my colleagues and come back to you with an answer, but I don't have that information directly with me now. Yes, please take note of my question, and you could send us the answer later. In your industry portfolio, you paid special attention to Canadian procurement. You said that there was undercapacity, but was this something that was across all sectors? Because we know that for vaccines, there was basically almost nothing. But what about disinfectant? There was the capacity to make disinfectant in Canada. We were buying it, what, $6 abroad and $1 worth from Canada? We noted a lack of capacity in several areas. Perhaps, Chair, it would be best to come back with more information for Mr. Gould. Certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't just talking about vaccines, we were talking about gloves, masks, there were protective clothing for doctors, PPE.
And if you do come back with that answer, I'm certain that Mr. Gould would be very amenable to that. Now we're going to move to another new colleague that we have, or at least a returning colleague that we have today, and Nathaniel Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes, sir.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kennedy, thanks for joining us today. On April 3rd, the Ethics Commissioner outlines in its report that you met to discuss making Palantir software available to the government on a pro bono basis and assisting with COVID-related supply chain issues. I know it was a relatively cursory meeting. At the end of the meeting, you've indicated that you said you didn't think the software would be applicable. Just so I'm clear, what would the software have done exactly?
The software package that was described to us was called Foundry, and to be frank, it was clear that it was very sophisticated. And when I had knowledge of the kind of needs we had, and certainly in my ministry, I mean, it was pretty clear this thing was a lot more sophisticated than anything we would probably have need for. That was my own personal judgment. As my understanding was, it was for managing, supply chain management. But, and again, this is probably best directed to the company, but my recollection of the presentation and the discussion was very sophisticated management of supply chains and scheduling and this sort of thing. So if you were running, for example, a large assembly line, or you were, you were an airline with, with the airlines with, you have, airplanes with thousands of parts and this sort of stuff, like you might need to manage a very complicated operation. This seemed like the kind of very sophisticated piece of software to do that. Our needs were frankly much more rudimentary. And so I had suggested they may wish to talk to for example, the automobile manufacturing industry or somebody like that.
I recall it's hard now to situate oneself in the same frame of mind, but I recall in the panic of the spring, I even locally had a number of constituents reaching out about potential contact tracing applications, about various ways that their own companies could support our efforts by way of PPE and more. You must have been overwhelmed in the position that you were in with requests. How many of these kinds of short exploratory meetings would you yourself have been a part of?
Mr. Chair, I've been a part of many of them. Look, I feel very privileged to have the role I have. I feel like I'm doing important work on behalf of the government and on behalf of Canadians. So you will never hear me complaining, and I think that's true of many of my colleagues. But it is very true, and I want to just preface this by saying it because I don't want it to sound like a complaint. I'm grateful to have the role I have, very grateful. But, even today, it's certainly in the early days of the pandemic, it was a 7-day-a-week affair, very, very late evenings, very, very long hours, kind of more or less continuously for weeks at a time. And that, from a lot of my colleagues and from myself, that kind of intensity continues. And we're very happy to be able to be doing the roles we're doing. But I would say, panic is maybe not the right word, but certainly a profound sense of, leaving no stone unturned, a real urgency, certainly in the early days, a real profound sense. We didn't quite know what was going to happen next. Maybe many Canadians would die. And it was on us to make sure that we did everything we could to support the government and making sure that didn't happen.
And on that point, because I don't have too much time,
yep.
Regardless of who represented the company, if a Canadian operation of a $46 billion public company reached out to say, we have a pro bono solution in the midst of a crisis, would you have taken that meeting?
I took many meetings, and as did my staff, with companies like that. And as I say, it was a matter of routine. The largest, companies in the world in manufacturing and software and logistics came to see us and offered their help and wanted to know what they could do. That was routine. And I can't account for them all in this call, but absolutely, I was in many, many meetings where I'd listen to companies say, we really like to help out. Is there anything we can do? That was routine, and in fact, it's kind of a routine part of what we do at ISET is to interact with businesses. So,
and my first thought, I'll tell you, when constituents reached out with potential solutions, was not who has this individual done dealings with previously. My first thought was, can this individual help and explore the actual proposal that they had on the table? Did the Ethics Commissioner make any finding that you violated any rule?
Mr. Chair, no, they did not. I mean, I was subject to the requirement not to deal with Mr. MacNaughton, but other than that, there's no other requirements that I'm aware of, and certainly no commentary beyond that.
Have you ever been subject to a finding by the Ethics Commissioner that you personally violated a conflict of interest rule?
No, Mr. Chair, I have not.
Thanks, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the second round with the Bloc Québécois as well as the New Democratic Party. This is a very fast round, colleagues. I always warn you about it. It's 2.5 minutes. So, Madame Gaudreau.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. So I'll keep going in that same direction. We just mentioned that you haven't... Oh, is that... Everything's okay, Mr. Bachrach? We won't count that time, right? So can you just explain to me, actually, what's the reason that we asked you or we ordered you to not have interactions with Mr. MacNaughton? Mr. Speaker, I think that's a question that you need to send to Mr. Dion, the Ethics Commissioner. But in my opinion, but according to you, or I'm asking you, so we explained it to you, right? So I suspect, obviously, that it's because I was in a meeting where he was present, but my only engagement was being in the same room. It was in that virtual room with Mr. MacNaughton. Aside from that, there's no other reason, because that's the only interaction that I had with him. And do you agree with me, and you say that you know the rules, and that when a government has been blamed twice and that public opinion and public confidence is not the same, do you agree that we need to be even more vigilant to avoid, or actually to show how much we're working properly? I want to ensure that my behavior always is showing a conduct that is ethical, that is clearly ethical and clearly in respect of the rule. And that's normal. Even in the absence of a crisis, all higher civil servants, that's our way of doing things. Obviously, I don't want to cause any problems. So I know that I'm paid by taxpayers, and it's important to respect the rules. But in the context of a pandemic, going beyond those two blames that were put on the government, was there even more vigilance as far as the special procedures for the Canadian plan that we've been discussing? No, go ahead. I think we have some imperatives. And first, to respect the rules. That's always important, because if we break the rules, that can put everything else at risk. So to respect them is always important. And also, we had the sense of wanting to move very quickly. So to respect all the rules, but to proceed in a way in which speed was also important.
En danger.
Merci, Monsieur Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Experience in committees, time is always our enemy. I will now go to Mr. Backrack for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kennedy, and apologies for leaving my mute off there for a moment. Mr. Kennedy, you mentioned in your earlier testimony that one of the important roles you play when you're taking these inquiries from businesses, or these proposals from businesses, is to review the company's financials. Can you explain why that step is important before moving on to any sort of formal engagement with these companies?
Well, I would say, Mr. Chair, if I just use the example, say, of the Strategic Innovation Fund, but it would apply to other programming. If we're going to partner and perhaps, make an investment in a company, then you want to have a sense of what the risk is that's being presented for the taxpayer. And the risk can come in a number of different ways. There can be financial risk, managerial risk, technology risk. So it isn't just financial. But one of the things that we would examine, for example, in the Strategic Innovation Fund would be, does the company have the financial wherewithal to do it? Are they going to be able to raise the funding? So maybe our money, the taxpayer money is going to go in, but they're going to raise money from other sources. Are they able to do it? Do they have enough cash in the bank that they're not going to run out of money halfway through the project? Those sorts of things. So we look at the financial. There's like a financial due diligence that's done. It isn't the only kind of risk that's looked at. We also look at, can the company partner well with others? Can they handle technology transfer if they need to do technology transfer? Is the technology very high risk, so that maybe it's a good idea, but the likelihood of it going belly up is high? So we would examine many of those facets in the SIF program as an example, but certainly financial assessment will be one of them, yes.
So given that process and the importance of that process, does it surprise you that sort of due diligence was not exercised in the $543 million contract with the We Charity?
Well, Mr. Chair, I just clarify that we have had really no, other than preparing some briefing notes for ministers that we typically would do with virtually every cabinet submission, we've had really no engagement with the We Charity or really any involvement in that particular proposal. So I'm not really able to comment on it.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think I just have a few more seconds left. I'm a little bit surprised by this offer of pro bono services from Palantir, and I'm just wondering if that was something that surprised you as well, Mr. Kennedy, in that meeting.
I would say, Mr. Chair, not really, and it's not because of Palantir or any of the controversy around it. Like, we actually received a lot of offers from firms to provide support pro bono, and of course, firms. I think in many cases people want to do the right thing and they want to help out the country, but it's also maybe a measure of goodwill to do that. But the bottom line is we received a lot of efforts of pro bono support from companies, of every conceivable configuration.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Yes,
Sorry,
absolutely.
We ran out of time again, but I wanted to
thank you, Mr. Chair.
A little bit of time for that answer. Now we're on to the last round. We'll have enough time for Mr. Gould pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back on the whole of the offers you received and what might have contributed to the fight against the pandemic. So there was 30% that ended up doing some work for the government of Canada, or is it 40% or 50%? Do you know how many participated actively? I don't have the numbers before me. I'll keep my answer very short. I know you only have 5 minutes, but in part, this is because there were occasions where the government made a purchase and other occasions where the government made an investment. And for example, like in the innovative strategy program, and there were other cases where the business really wanted to know or wanted a bit of information from us or an opinion from us, but did not necessarily ask for a contract or an investment. So we transacted with hundreds and hundreds of companies, but what happened after that was that there were some of them, or it was a contract, there was an investment, and sometimes they didn't need any government help. It was just an issue of consulting. So we exchanged with many businesses, but I don't have before me what happened in each case. Of course, we've made some investment. I can give you some example, but to give a global number, I don't have that before me. Okay, I feel like you were sort of put between a rock and a hard place. You had many businesses that wanted to deal with you, and you, of course, needed to respond. And there was maybe a little bit of pressure from the government to ensure that certain items were produced or they were purchased elsewhere. Was the pressure stronger on the government side or on the business side? Certainly. So for us, it was clear that there were gaps. In the spring, for example, we knew clearly that there was huge pressure to get masks. Projections were showing that we'd have a shortage of masks. It was impossible to get enough masks from outside the country. So there were spaces where the pressure was huge. And it was in recognition that there was a shortage in the country. There weren't enough masks. So is that pressure from the industry or is that pressure from the government? It was actually the pressure of the situation. And there were many spots like that. Certainly, as masks were concerned, as far as ventilators were concerned, that was another issue. There were protective clothing. We worked with the industry in order to change their production so that they could produce this type of clothing. And just one last question. Will you submit a report to government concerning the more sensitive points, or just to help us avoid those same mistakes? Maybe in 5 years we'll have a similar situation, maybe not quite so bad, but just where the weaknesses were in Canada, and a report that would show what needs to be improved on the industrial level so the worst can be avoided. I think some of these reflections in some ways are already ongoing. For example, as far as masks are concerned, government made investment, and we have a factory making those N95. I think we have good capacity in Canada. That's long-term capacity thanks to the investments that were made. But a bit of a broader study that will be up to government to decide whether it's necessary or not. But certainly, we've already made some recommendations that are long-term for the country, and the investments that are on the field, in some ways, some of them respond to that need. I don't know if that was clear enough. But your question as far as what are the long-term needs and what are the gaps, that's a good question, and we're already considering that. Thank you very much.
We'll move on to Mr. Sorbera for 5 minutes. Mr. Sorbera, you need to unmute.
Yes. Sorry about that, clerk. I'd like to go back to Mr. Kennedy. Excuse me, Deputy Minister. Through this pandemic, if you can explain to me, what have you seen and what have you experienced in terms of how quickly things have moved, how quick our government has reacted, and putting in place programs to help Canadian workers and Canadian businesses?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think everybody, certainly I felt this way, had a profound sense of the need to move quickly. The global situation evolved very fast over the months of February and March. And I would say there was a real premium placed on moving rapidly to put in place support programs. And I've described some of the work that was done on personal protective equipment and work on biomanufacturing. We also felt a profound need to try to move as quickly as possible there. And so obviously I think at the end of the day, Canadians will judge, for themselves, the response. But I think we did our best. I certainly feel like my organization and my employees did their very best to move as quickly as possible while being responsible. I think honorable members in this committee have talked about the necessity of, not throwing the rules out and so on, but trying to move very rapidly, diligently. If there were risks to be taken because we had incomplete information, we tried to make, calculated smart risks and to not, let too much bureaucracy and red tape kind of, slow down what we all felt was like the need to move quickly to make sure the country was saved from a pretty, desperate situation.
Absolutely. And if you can kind of comment on this between the different departments, obviously, with ISED, procurement, myself as the parliamentary secretary and national revenue minister, public servants across this country have just done an enormous amount of heavy lifting for Canadians and to ensure their public safety, but also ensure that Canadians got the funds they needed to those that were impacted by COVID-19. So if you can just describe to the committee how the working relationship was amongst and between the various departments.
Mr. Chair, I think the working relationship, probably won't surprise you, has been excellent. In order to manage, kind of faster processes, if you like, and to try to move with alacrity during this crisis, we did establish quite a few governance mechanisms. So, for example, I have very regular meetings, like multiple times a week, with my colleagues in public services and procurement, public health, Health Canada, the Privy Council office, and so on. So we've created, if you like, some bureaucratic governance structures to make sure that we're all joined at the hip. We're sharing information. We're able, as officials, to make recommendations to our masters quickly. And so I think there has been a very, very tight collaborative relationship among the lead departments throughout this whole process. I've only named a few that I work with regularly, but certainly it extends to the Indigenous Services and the Public Safety Ministry and a whole bunch of others.
Thank you, sir. How am I for time, Chair and Clerk?
A minute and a half.
Oh, thank you. I can do a follow-up question, and to the Deputy Minister again. As we move forward, how do you see your role shifting in terms of now we're moving to more of on the recovery side? We see the initial vaccines are now being rolled out here in Ontario, University Health Network. We've seen the Premier of Ontario applaud how the vaccine rollout. We've seen General Hillier comment on it. On our side, the representative from the Army that's come over to assist. Sorry, I've forgotten his name. But in terms of transitioning some of the programs back to more of a recovery focus, Deputy Minister, how do you see that angle of rolling out the next few months?
Well, I think we are definitely thinking about the recovery and how we can best support the government and best support Canadians, workers in the business sector in the recovery to come. The other thing I think we're doing as a ministry is we're trying to reflect, I guess, on some of the lessons and some of what we've seen during the pandemic. So, in the fall economic statement, for example, there was a reference to examining biomanufacturing and kind of, what the long-term picture needs to be for biomanufacturing. That's something that we're certainly looking at. I feel very grateful as a Canadian that we had certain capacities in Canada, that the country was able to pivot to produce a lot of personal protective equipment. But there are areas where there are gaps. Biomanufacturing is arguably one of them. And so one of the things I think ISED can maybe support the government and support Canada in the future will be looking at what are some of the capabilities we can support in the business sector so that we're better prepared for the future. And that's something we're certainly working on.
Very much, Mr. Sorbera. Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. We bid you a very Merry Christmas. We're all giving the greeting of a great 2021 coming up because of all we have lived through in 2020. And we're going to suspend now to go to our second panel. Mr. Angus is, of course, always wants to entertain us, but doesn't understand that he complicates everyone's life with his great voice. And but I know he does that with.
I'll do anything to score points, Chair. Anything. If you give me an extra 30 seconds, I'll promise to stop singing.
Colleagues, we're going to go to our third panel, and we have with us Denis Gallant, who's a lawyer and is testifying as an individual. Mark Blumberg from Blumberg Partners, and we also have Jeramie Scott, Senior Counsel for Electronic Privacy Information Center. So I have you in that order that I just introduced you. Mr. Gallant, are you okay to go ahead as the first presenter?
Oui, absolument, Monsieur le Président.
And I believe that our clerk has advised you from 5
Yes.
the maximum?
Oui.
Okay, commence s'il vous plaît.
Alors, à titre de remarque préliminaire.
So, as preliminary comments, distinguished members of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, right off the bat, I would like to warn you that I'm not an ethicist or an expert in this area. And so I will leave those who are far more qualified than I in this area to enlighten you in that matter. In addition, I don't claim to have an advanced knowledge of the rules about awarding federal government contracts. However, I do feel that my experiences may be of some use in your work. I have been the chief prosecutor in the Commission on the Investigation and Awarding of Contracts in Government Contracting in Quebec, and that was for the construction industry, and it was known as the Charbonneau Commission, presided upon by Justice Charbonneau of Superior Court. I was also Inspector General of the City of Montreal with a mandate to promote integrity and prevent and combat any fraud in the City of Montreal contracting. I was also CEO of the Autorité des Marchés Publics, an organization which has the mission and was the key recommendation of the Charbonneau Commission, which was to monitor government contracting in Quebec. So I believe that that experience could be of some use to you in your work. In Canada, both federally and provincially, government contracting is strictly regulated by various laws and rules and regulations. The basic underlying principles for these rules are the following. Ensure that the best product or service is obtained at the best price for all Canadians, guarantee freedom of competition, and provide all suppliers equal opportunity to do business with the government. These objectives have been anchored into our legal system for a long time, and they've often been reaffirmed by the courts all over Canada. To be sure that the objectives are respected in higher value government contracts, for example, in Quebec, it was $100,000, public tendering is compulsory, barring exceptions. The idea of public tendering, of course, is to have a government be able to reach everyone who's interested in contracting and who has the expertise and skills required to carry out the contract to ensure the most competition. The various rules and laws regulating government procurement in Canada do allow for emergency or exceptional situations. Now, in this case, nobody is questioning the exceptional planetary situation that we've been in since late last winter. Nobody is questioning the urgency for our leaders to act and inject massive sums of money to help Canadians deal with the disastrous impact of the pandemic, including economic impact. However, an emergency must not become a pretext to circumvent binding government procurement rules. Emergencies must not contribute to lax monitoring and oversight of the public coffers. As a former Inspector General of the City of Montreal, and as a taxpayer, I have to wonder about what control measures were implemented to prevent any inflated pricing, potential fraud, and waste. I also wonder about whether we've received the best products and services at the best price from the companies, organizations that the state dealt with, or that in which cases the state did not use the open procurement system, claiming the unique nature of this situation. We perhaps could gain some inspiration for what's been done in certain Inspector General's offices in the U.S. And incidentally, I am a certified Inspector General. I have received training. I'm also member of the boards of directors of the Association of Inspectors General, the only Canadian member. And until December, I will be member of the executive. In these offices, programs such as what we call integrity monitors or live monitoring, when there's a massive injection of money after some natural catastrophe, and we know that in the U.S., hurricanes and other natural catastrophes do occur fairly frequently, unfortunately. And so there is federal government or state spending, and there's always a guarantee to obtain this integrity monitor. So to avoid price gouging, waste, and potential fraud. I could tell you more about this and these different integrity monitor programs if you have any questions about them. So again, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to appear before you, and I hope to be able to assist you in your work. Thank you very much, Mr. Gallant. Mr. Blumberg.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee today. My name is Mark Blumberg. I'm a lawyer at a small law firm in Toronto that has 10 lawyers, and we focus exclusively on nonprofits, charities, and philanthropy. I'm going to talk today about the scandal involving the Canada Student Service Grant and We Charity, and that it isn't unfortunately over. These comments are a point in time, and the saga is continuing. There's a lot we don't know about the scandal. Having various committees in the past looking at, of the House of Commons, looking at these issues was helpful, but it was quite inefficient. Also, there's a lot of complicated issues at play, such as charity compliance issues, and I would say that, in my opinion, these committees are not really ideally equipped to deal with these types of investigations. That's why I've suggested in the past that a public inquiry be launched into this particular scandal, and then the various committees can go back to focusing on their regular work in these difficult times dealing with COVID. There are essentially three somewhat interlinked components to the scandal. First, the design of the CSSG program itself was problematic. The federal government decision-making process, and I'm not an expert in conflicts of interest in that, but it appears to be conflicted. And then many concerns about the choice of We Charity to deliver this particular program. This is not just about a $543 million program. It's about a federal government during COVID, when the charity sector was under tremendous strain and continues to be, giving almost nothing to the charity sector, certainly almost nothing when one thinks of the tens of billions being spent. And then the government proposes to give $543 million to one organization who has a checkered past. So it's, in a sense, the contrast of the way in which this one charity was treated with a $543 million grant compared to how the federal government dealt with the rest of the charity sector, which has largely been silence and providing absolutely nothing to most charities. So that's one major facet. Secondly, another big issue is, was there tremendous influence by Finance Department on Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC? Or did ESDC think that We Charity was a great charity and uniquely able to deliver this program? If it's the first, the finance pressure, then Mr. Morneau has resigned and perhaps that influence will stop. And that's a particular circumstance. If it's the second, the possibility that ESDC actually thought We Charity was a great charity, then it's a much more serious issue. It would really call into question the capacity of ESDC to undertake due diligence on charities and their decision-making. If this is really an ESDC decision, as many Liberals have claimed, then significant changes may be needed at ESDC, or tens of billions of funds could be equally poorly allocated over the next few years. Assuming finance was not pressuring ESDC, how ESDC could have gotten this so wrong is mind-boggling. That is one of the many reasons why I think a public inquiry into the CSSG We scandal is worthwhile. There are many compliance issues that have been raised by this whole We Charity scandal, including but not limited to using multiple corporations, some of which are Canadian registered charities, and a lack of clarity between the different corporations. Treatment of employees during employment and post-employment. reporting and transparency, lobbying of government officials without registering, partisan activities, social enterprise and business activities, government grant-making processes and fairness, owning large amounts of real estate, corporate sponsorship and access to children, compensation of founders, and governance and having founders involved in a charity for a long period of time. These are some of the many sort of issues that have been floating around over the last few months. Trust in the charity sector is vital. Public trust is like oxygen. You only really notice a problem when it's in short supply. Will Canadians trust charities less because of the We Charity scandal? Will they think the problems of We Charity are reflective of the broader charity sector and trust the sector less? We Charity was quite a unique organization, but it wasn't completely unique. Therefore, their indiscretions may affect the reputation of the charity sector. It may take years to see the full impact, but we're already seeing significant declines in public trust of charities, despite huge gains in public trust at the beginning of COVID in response to the heroic work by some in the charity sector to respond to COVID. The biggest concern for the charity sector is that the We Charity scandal will hurt the reputation of the sector, undercut donations, and government funding. Transparency is vital for maintaining public trust. We're concerned that there's not nearly enough transparency in the Canadian charity sector. Over the last 10 years, the CRA, for various reasons, including maybe pressure from certain special interest groups, has actually been reducing the amount of information they publicly collect and provide about charities. Other countries, meanwhile, have been increasing transparency on charities. Having inadequate transparency on registered charities in Canada meant that there's not enough information on We Charity available and very little on Me2We, which is the for-profit arm. It's hard to understand the full picture when you can only see half the story. I've submitted to the Finance Committee 10 recommendations on improving the regulation of charities in Canada. I'll just mention 3 ideas that I'm going to bring to this committee, which is currently that if the CRA is aware that a charity is involved in very problematic activities, they're not allowed to disclose that information, not to the public or even to members of parliament. The federal government should amend the confidentiality provisions of the Income Tax Act, which is Section 241, in order to allow the CRA at its discretion to disclose serious non-compliance of registered charities. Secondly, now with registered charities, there is some public information available from the public portion of the T3010. But when it comes to nonprofits, which is 80 to 100,000 organizations, the CRA discloses nothing, and for many groups, there's very little information available on them. We have proposed that already many nonprofits, and certainly the bigger ones, file a form called the T1044 every year. They're filed with CRA, they're inputted into a database by CRA. These should be disclosed. It's no extra effort or burden for either those nonprofits or CRA, but it would give us at least a little bit of an idea about that other part of the nonprofit sector. We've also proposed the federal government provide funding to the Charities Directorate to increase the amount of information collected and distributed on charities. Those are sort of 3 proposals out of the 10 that we had made. We essentially want a balanced regulatory approach to charities, which is appropriate to the importance and tax subsidy provided to charities. The We Charity scandal raised a number of very important questions about the regulation of registered charities. Either regulation of the charity sector will be enhanced, or the reputation of the sector and public trust in the sector may decline. I've publicly provided detailed comments on... Yeah.
I gave you an extra 30 seconds, but I'll have to, go there. And then if there's any other point you want to make, you could certainly make it as we get into the question period.
No problem.
Mr. Scott? You're up, sir, for up to 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Jeramie Scott, and I am Senior Counsel at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, also known as EPIC. EPIC is a public interest research center in Washington, D.C. It was established in 1994 to focus public attention on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues and to protect privacy, freedom of expression, and democratic values in the information age. As part of EPIC's open government work, EPIC makes frequent use of the Freedom of Information Act to obtain information from the United States government about surveillance programs. Public disclosure of this information improves government oversight and accountability It also helps ensure that the public is fully informed about the activities of the government. EPIC routinely files lawsuits to force disclosure of agency records, and it is my understanding the committee is interested in EPIC's Freedom of Information Act lawsuits related to the U.S. government's use of Palantir software. EPIC has litigated 2 Freedom of Information Act cases that might be of interest to the committee. The first was a case against the U.S. Customs and Border Protection to obtain records related to the Analytical Framework for Intelligence, which is used to assign risk assessments to travelers. The more recent lawsuit was against U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and it sought records pertaining to systems built on Palantir software. That system is the Falcon system, and the Falcon systems are built on Palantir's Gotham platform, a proprietary software product which allows users to search, visualize, and analyze complex data sets. Falcon serves as Immigration and Customs Enforcement's primary data storage and analysis system. The Falcon system pulls data from several government databases and contains numerous categories of sensitive information, including biographical information like dates of birth, places of birth, and social security numbers, and financial data such as bank account numbers and transaction numbers. The Falcon systems also contain data from commercial databases and open source information publicly available on the internet, including information from social media sites. According to the documents obtained by EPIC through the Freedom of Information Act, Falcon systems also contain call record data and GPS data, and through the use of Palantir software, the Falcon systems are capable of linking together this and other data through social network analysis. The Falcon system uses the massive amount of data it contains and analyzes that data with Palantir's software to locate undocumented immigrants to apprehend and deport. Reports indicate that the Falcon system was used in a raid last year in Mississippi that resulted in 680 arrests. The raid was one of the largest in U.S. history and terrorized the immigrant community in Mississippi and separated hundreds of individuals from their families. There's an ongoing campaign against tech companies like Palantir that provide the technical tools for ICE to conduct raids like the one that occurred in Mississippi. Palantir is also linked to the United States Customs and Border Protection's Analytical Framework for Intelligence. It was the documents obtained by EPIC that confirm Palantir's involvement in Customs and Border Protection's Analytical Framework for Intelligence system. The system uses information from federal, state, and local law enforcement databases as well as commercial databases. This information is often sensitive personal information and includes biographical information, personal associations, travel itineraries, immigration records, and home and work addresses. The information is used to generate risk assessments of travelers and intelligence reports. The capabilities of the Analytical Framework for Intelligence include the ability to perform geospatial, link, and temporal analysis of the data. In addition to Palantir's controversial work with the U.S. government, particularly the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Palantir has been scrutinized for the predictive policing service the company has provided to various law enforcement agencies within the United States. Palantir's predictive policing services include identifying potential offenders and their networks. Palantir compiles a target list of likely offenders and victims based on analysis of mass data sets from a variety of sources, including social media, criminal databases, probation and parole information, jailhouse phone calls, automated license plate reader systems, and law enforcement case management systems, among other sources. Palantir's predictive policing product performs social network analysis to build webs of social connections to identify potential offenders or victims without prior police contracts. These tools sweep in vast amounts of people that do not have a strong connection to any criminal activity. A couple of years ago, Palantir's work in predictive policing was scrutinized after it was revealed that the company had been secretly using the city of New Orleans to test its predictive policing technology. Palantir had a pro bono relationship with the New Orleans police that was only known to the mayor and the city attorney. The city council members were unaware of the program until it was made public by news reporting. After the story broke about Palantir's work in New Orleans, the city ended the partnership. In almost every case, Palantir has sought to implement predictive policing without community knowledge or consent. In general, Palantir has tried to keep secret its capabilities and how the company's services are used by government entities. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much for that testimony, Mr. Scott. We'll move on to our question and answer session now with 6 minutes. Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your opening remarks. I appreciate you being here today. My first question is for Mr. Blumberg. So I'll roll two questions together here so that you can give a fulsome answer with the limited time that I have. It's with respect to the due diligence, and I believe a lack of due diligence by the federal government in awarding the CSSG contribution agreement to the WE organization. And specifically, if you could comment on the red flags that I believe should have been raised with respect to the state of the WE organization's board, as well as the publicly reported information about the disarray of their financial situation. So if you could give me an answer to that, Mr. Blumberg.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say, yeah, the first inkling that I had, and that was very public, that there's a big problem with We Charity was a 2010 Globe and Mail article. It was about 2 pages of the Globe and Mail, and it was very long. I remember still reading it on an airplane a long time ago, and there were lots of questions that came out of it. So that was from about 2010. I think it would be pretty clear to people. Anyone in the charity sector who's ever spoken to 3 people who worked at WE would have some interesting stories to tell you that are just very much unlike any other group I've ever seen. And then also Canada Land, which is sort of a news podcast sort of site, has done some extensive coverage around 2018, 2019 into a number of issues that were very public, very much out there. So I would say that, you know, even for a $500,000 grant, one would easily have been able to pick up these many sort of issues if one wanted to pick them up. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say that there definitely could be some huge improvements. I mean, on the one hand, I sort of hope that it was inappropriate pressure by the finance minister, because then I'm a big believer in government and governmental action, and I think the government in general has done a lot of good things during COVID. I would prefer that it not be a problem of that ESDC really thought this was a great charity, because if it did think that this was a great charity, the uniquely able to do this and all that, then I think that there's probably got to be some changes there. So I'm not hoping that's the right answer, but I unfortunately don't know. And I think that that's why we need a public inquiry to actually look deep into these issues, because it involves not just this money, but lots of other money. And the charity sector, the nonprofit sector, many parts of society are very reliant on ESDC, and we want to make sure there's great decision making going on there.
Why is it that you think, with respect to the claim that the WE organization is the only organization that could deliver the CSSG, what do you make of that? Why do you think that that's not a credible claim?
Well, I can just tell you that the one issue is the 543 million. That was very problematic for many people in the charity sector. But the claim that Trudeau made, that this was the only organization that could handle this, was phenomenal and angered a lot of people because it is just incredibly ridiculous. It's demeaning to the charity sector. It basically, I mean, the charity sector has huge capacities in people and expertise and other things, so that something like that could be said was just offensive to the charity sector. Like, on the plus side, Trudeau did cancel the program very quickly, which I want to give him credit for. And the money that was given was brought back. But there's a lot of issues, including 30 or 40,000 names and detailed information on 30 or 40,000 people, including some of them who might be minors. And I don't know what happened to that information and other information that we've been collecting over the years. Very detailed demographic information. And, you know, I would be certainly a little bit worried about that if this is a committee that's tasked with privacy, because it could involve hundreds of thousands of youth and young adults in this country. But in terms of, you know, the decision making, I know that in Ottawa, the actual decision making and the conflict issue is a big issue. Within the charity sector, the biggest concerns were that this program was very poorly constructed. And I think that's an ESDC issue, not a WE issue. And secondly, the choice of WE. The exact details of what the cabinet did is less of interest to the charity sector, I would think, but certainly that so little has been done for the charity sector and so much money was going to be given to them. It's a $60 million organization getting $543 million to spend on all this stuff. And while the charity sector usually with government grants get like 12% overhead costs, this was much higher overhead potentially, depending on how the framework worked out in terms of the number of people involved and things like that. So yeah, I would certainly not see this as a good situation, and hopefully we'll get more answers in the future.
Well, I appreciate that. You made reference to, in your opening comments, to organizational structure. So for the WE organization, and it's hard for most people to take a look at where it begins and where it ends. And you referenced reporting by Canada Land as one who've done a bit of a dive into that. Do you think that it's intentional, that type of structuring to make it more difficult for people to understand? Creating a company that has no track record specifically to a new legal entity specifically to deliver on this massive government program. Why do you think that they're structured in such a complex and hard to follow way?
Mr. Blumberg, keep that question in mind because we ran out of time, and you might be able to squeeze in an answer on that in another round. We'll go on to Madam Latanzio for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the witnesses that are before us today. I'm going to direct my question to Mr. Denis Gallant. I just want to preface to say that I've worked with the Inspector General back in the day as my function as a municipal councillor for the City of Montreal, and actually was vice chairman of that committee. So I can attest to the excellent work that was done by the committee and Mr. Gallant. So Mr. Gallant, pleased to see you here today. I'm going to jump right in and be direct with the following question. Do you believe that the federal government could benefit from adopting Quebec's public procurement integrity provisions? And if so, would you provide this committee details and examples? Thank you. Hello? Mr. Speaker?
Oui. M'entendez?
Oui.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, member, for your compliments and for your question. I believe that the federal government could, in fact, benefit from examining what's being done in Quebec. We're post-scandal, but not that long ago. So to prepare for appearing here today, I was reading the Honorable Justice John Gomery's report after the sponsorship scandal. And there have been things that have changed at the federal level. I think that despite the goodwill and good laws, I don't think there is ongoing monitoring. So we could have the best laws in the world, but if nobody is ensuring oversight of the process, that's where we end up in problems of waste, of potential fraud, etc. So whether we're talking about the Inspector General's office or the Autorité des marchés publics in Quebec, when contracts are signed, or even when there are private agreements made, there could be a neutral, independent organization. It could be, for example, appointed by the House of Commons, and in very quick time, they could, they could have very quick turnaround, as they say, and send the signals and say, "Hey, watch out! There's a problem here. This contract shouldn't have been done in this way, in a mutually agreed to way. It should have been an open contract." So the public procurement legislation was changed in Quebec. And now if you want to have a direct, not open contract, there has to be a notice of intention sent on the electronic system of the tendering system. saying, we are preparing to give a charitable organization or some other company a private contract for reason X or Y, and that's why we're not going to be having a public tender for it. And that way, in a very tight turnaround time of, let's say, 2 weeks, people could say, I'm interested in providing that service to the government. And not just that, I am in a position to do it. So I have the capacity. So getting back to We Charity, I understand that there was an emergency situation, but, you know, the urgency of giving student assistance, was it so urgent that we couldn't do a public tender? In Quebec, the way we have changed the public procurement legislation, and with the Autorité des marchés publics, the government contracting authority, they are obliged to put this notice up. And if not, there is a complaint that can be made to the Autorité des marchés publics, and that authority does have the power to cancel a contract if it did not respect the rules. So I think the federal government would benefit by copying that. Thank you very much, and thank you for that answer.
Mr. Blumberg. Mr. Blumberg, in an article that's posted on your website, CanadianCharterLaw.ca, you note that there are 3 components, as you discussed, that you see fit to address the issue involving the We Charity. You also note that different people are interested in different parts of the story, mainly the opposition parties, as they are only interested in only part of the story because it makes the government look bad and benefits them. Can you perhaps expand on that comment that you made on your website?
Sure. Well, I would say the We Charity scandal, I could criticize the government and the opposition parties for how they're dealing with it, but I'm not totally shocked that each are dealing with it that way. You know, there are some partisan liberals who've told me 100 times there is no scandal, nothing was wrong, there's absolutely no issue here. So if you don't register after you have 65 meetings, there's no issue. I've heard that from liberals. So that I find shocking. And I find sometimes that some of the commentary by some of the opposition at times is not correct, or it's partisan. It comes across to me as it doesn't make a lot of sense, some of it, but some of it is very good. So I think both sides, the way this has been handled, but you know, in fairness, these are politicians handling a very complicated, difficult story, and that's why I think it would be better to put it in a public inquiry and have someone actually really look at these issues closely and come to a determination. Like I said, I think I probably know about 20% of the story based on watching this very closely for many years and certainly the last 6 months. There is so much information that unless there was a public inquiry, we probably wouldn't be able to find that out. And you know, the question came before about, was this sort of an accident that they had all these different structures? I think you can't say it was an accident. You don't accidentally have a charity. What I find very weird was that it's very clear from the public record why, for example, the We Charity Foundation was set up, because we have a copy of the charity application, which says that it was being set up to be a real estate holding company. And so when people are saying that, you know, that's incorrect or something, I'm just scratching my head, because this is a document that we provided to the Canada Revenue Agency.
Sorry to interrupt you again, Mr. Blumberg. Committee's time is always our enemy. So, and I have to adjudicate some level of fairness. I try to stretch it a bit to allow you to finish your answer, but that's as far as I can stretch it in this case. Maintenant, Madame Goudreau.
Over to Madame Goudreau, 6 minutes. I don't know if you heard me before, but I was explaining that I'm new and I have learned a lot. But what you just said, it's as though what we could have thought, perceived, interpreted with the 20% or whatever proportion of what we know, you're now saying it out loud. And now I have a series of very specific questions. But you've practically answered all of them with a few exceptions. So ultimately, the question I keep coming back to is, well, okay, both sides, partisanship, it's a game. But look, we're trying to manage a pandemic. And regardless of whether we like it or not, you're only going to be careful if it plays into your interests. I mean, today, are we not looking at how we proceed and how in 2020 we're really like out in left field, and when it comes to protecting our public coffers and privacy and personal information, when other countries, and I'm going to ask you, what other countries should we be basing ourselves on? How come we are taking this time? We should have the entire integrity process already. How come, we're just having filibusters and stretching time and this and that? I mean, happily, Christmas is coming around the corner because I'm totally discouraged. My children have no trust. They said, Mommy, look into this. Show them that we can trust our government. So I need your help. And I want to hear all of you on this subject. Sorry if I'm being a little bit intense here. Mr. Gallant. I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I lost another 12 seconds. I'm going to answer you with what Justice Gallant wrote in 2005. And what I find sad is that here it is 15 years later, and we're still at the same place. In his preface, Gallant wrote, "This report is nothing other than the depressing note of all the shortcomings in the deficient preparation and delivery of a government program, together with the inability of the government apparatus to control waste. It's all about misconduct and misrepresentation, problems of communication that have led to loss and waste of considerable sums at the Canadian taxpayers' expense. The Canadian taxpayers' outrage and anger is legitimate." I think that the same movie is playing a second time. And now it's because you're thinking, oh, because of the pandemic, anything goes. What I was saying initially, Madam Member, yes, the rules should be more flexible. We can understand that, of course, there is an emergency situation, and the emergencies are at different degrees. I mean, we needed masks very quickly. Giving a charitable organization who doesn't even have the ability of doing this for French-speaking Canadians, because maybe they'd have to subcontract it out to some other or give a contract to another organization in Quebec. Was it that necessary to act so fast? And did it have to be a non-open contract? Did it have to go privately without looking elsewhere to see whether anyone else would have been in a position to deliver this, to provide that service at a better cost? Because we don't have that information. Now, it's not that Quebec is any better than anybody else. We went through those scandals. You know that they're Quebec members. You're from Quebec. We can't keep beating ourselves. But with that public inquiry, not only were we putting a spotlight on what was going on, but we decided that we were going to set up monitoring organizations so that the same problem cannot reoccur. And so what I deplore is that in the Gallant report, all kinds of wonderful things have been done. I've done follow-up. But very often people say, oh, if there's a problem, we'll send it to the police. Well, I'm a former Crown prosecutor. You know what it's like when you go to the police. Mr. Gallant, you're opening a very big door, and there's a lot of cooperation that's coming. And I think that the Financial Markets Authority, or the Government Procurement Authority is a very excellent source. But we don't have much time, so I'd like to hear from our next speaker. If there's a party that has no interest in getting the power, it's Bloc Québécois. So what do? We represent our people, and our people happen to be Quebec. So when you talk to me like this, I am totally detached from that. But, which country? And tell me what your opinion is. 1 minute and 22 seconds left.
On the issue of the procurement in this case, I would say I'm always worried we're going to learn the wrong lessons from a scandal, okay? I will tell you that for the average charity receiving maybe, and this is not even average, but about a quarter of charity receive government money. And they receive over 160 billion from 3 different levels of government, mainly not federal, it's mainly provincial, okay? But the amount of bureaucracy that goes into government funding is actually quite high. It's extreme in some cases. So when you have a $100,000 grant and you have a 2-year process of filling in forms and other things, it's very extreme and a lot of due diligence and a lot of, so most government grants are done very well. This is completely atypical. Such a quick amount, such a large amount, and going to basically a shell corporation and things like that. So I would just say we want to learn, if anything, I would learn from this that this sort of thing shouldn't happen. But in fact, we need to look at the whole system, and certainly for smaller grants, you know, where government's giving away $50,000 or $100,000, there's probably too much scrutiny.
Donc, vous êtes d'accord?
Yeah.
Je pense qu'il me reste plus de temps, puis j'ai une autre question, c'est je veux savoir le pays avant que Monsieur le Président.
I have another question. I don't have no time. So you agree with us? So what country? That's my question.
For example, ask for a lot more information than the Canadians do. The British, the Australians, in fact, we're very far behind. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Now on to Mr.
Merci
Angus
beaucoup, messieurs.
for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much.
And just before you press that timer, I wanted to ask you two quick questions. One, will we be doing a second round because I see the clock is moving here? And also, I understand Mr. Erskine-Smith was bringing the issue of us bringing Pornhub as witnesses, and I missed the first part of the meeting. Will that happen at the end?
Yes, that's Mr. Yeah, I've stopped the time, so colleagues, yes, Mr. Erskine-Smith was kind enough to say that he'd deal with it at the end, so we didn't interrupt the two panels because we have 4 witnesses who portion their time today with us. And you know something, if I can get unanimous consent, Mr. Angus, if you'd like, because it's 2:48 right now, but I can get unanimous consent and I can add your 2.5 minutes to your time right now. So you'd have an 8.5 minutes portion. I think
I would love everybody, and I would sing to you forever or stop singing. If my dear sweet colleagues who I've treated so well for the last 6 months.
I think I don't see any kind.
It's Christmas. Come on.
Yeah, I'm going to assume there's consent because I don't see any shaking heads. So,
okay.
That's what I will do. I will consider that.
Merci, monsieur.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. Scott, thank you for joining us today. Palantir is a new feature in Canada, and we're learning a great deal about them, partially because they went and hired our ambassador to the United States, and he got himself into deep trouble for lobbying when he was not legally allowed to. We also learned that the Canada Pension Plan has become massive investors in Palantir. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Palantir came out of the weaponization of data in Iraq and Afghanistan with money that had come from the CIA in QTEL, their venture arm. Is that how a lot of this technology developed initially?
That is correct, Mr. Angus.
Right. And I'm thinking of an article in Blumberg I read in 2018 that said Peter Thiel's data mining company is using war on terror tools to track American citizens. And the scary thing is Palantir is desperate for new customers. So the work that Palantir has done in terms of the Falcon project, going after migrants, work that was previously done going after counterinsurgents in Afghanistan was played out in the United States streets. Does that create serious questions about the human rights abuses that have been linked to Palantir through Amnesty International and other studies?
Well, it does raise questions. And part of the issue, obviously, is there's a lack of transparency with respect to, the sophisticated data mining software that Palantir uses, the data that they have access to, and how that data is used by the U.S. government and other governments.
Palantir, the pitch that they gave here was doing pro bono, and my liberal colleagues have been sort of saying how great it was that everyone stepped up to help out in the pandemic. So Palantir is just one of those good neighbors that showed up across our border willing to do stuff for free to help us. Our ethics commissioner didn't buy that story. He said, you offer pro bono, it means you're trying to get contracts. Do you think that Palantir's in the business of doing decent neighborly kind of work, or the fact that they had meetings with our chief of defense? What would you tell Canadians about trusting gifts coming from Palantir?
My perspective would be similar in the sense that if they are offering pro bono, it's for a reason, whether it's to get government contracts or to basically get access to free data to use in fine-tuning their software offerings, or both.
that's a big part of their operation, right? Is getting the data. I'm concerned about it because I mean they got to meet all the way up to our deputy prime minister, and yet Peter Thiel, when I've been looking up on him, he's been tied to extremist groups on the far right of America. He says, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." In terms of the culture that Palantir brings to this, right now, Canada Pension Plan has become one of the largest investors in Palantir. And the Canada Pension Plan, excellent group, have a human rights frame that they must, a lens that they must apply when they're seeking out investments. Would you believe that, or would you question whether CPP had done the due diligence if they're willing to do business with Palantir?
I would question whether they did the due diligence because of the way Palantir software is used to, buy a government entity like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which has been involved in some serious issues related to human rights with the way they've gathered and caged kids and separated families, etc.
Yes, certainly we've seen the footage of the caged children, and it's been very, very, very frightening for us on this side of the border. So I want to thank you for that. I'm going to move now to Mr. Blumberg. I was interested, you said you studied the Kielburger organization for some time, and you believe you've figured you've got about 20% picture of how they operate. I've been on committees for 16 years, and I haven't found anything almost as difficult as this. So they have multiple corporate entities, shell corporations, organizations in Canada, the United States, and Kenya, and it's all focused on the charity work they say they do, Kenya and the children. Here's a company, Keel Initiatives Ltd. We found it in their filings. They sold water in Kenya under the Me to We label. We later found that they were banned in Kenya, and my daughter, who worked in Africa, said, "You got to really do something, Dad, to get banned in Kenya." So the Kielburger Group were running this water company, and yet still being a charity. Is that something that would raise alarm bells with these multiple holdings, real estate organizations, side deals that they're running?
Well, yes, absolutely. It's not that charities can't do business. The charities do lots of business. If you ever go to a hospital and you park in the parking lot, that's a related business. It could be perfectly fine. What is unusual here is normally the charity owns the business. The business isn't owned by one or two other people, and the charity is providing certain recruitment or volunteers or other things to the business owned by someone else. So that's really the anomaly. It's not, I'm all for charities doing business activities. I just want it when the charity does a business activity that if there's a profit or if there's an appreciation in the value of the business, which is mainly because many businesses don't have a profit, but there's appreciation in the value, I want that to go to the charity.
Well, so, that's an important question because we don't know how the finances work. We've been told that 50% goes to the charity, then it was 80%, then it's 100%, but we don't get to see. Now, in terms of their structure, the Kielburger brothers, like we learned, Mark Kielburger did all the main negotiating for the big stars to come to the We events. Craig Kielburger did all the negotiating with the government on the contract with the We scandal. They said that they didn't need to register to lobby because they're just volunteers, and yet they had the power as volunteers to fire their board of directors when the board of directors of their charity asked for financial documents. Is that something that raises serious alarm bells? Like the fact that this sort of founder status, like how they operate, I haven't seen anything quite like it.
And this particular, and certainly the scope of it, I haven't either seen anything like it. But what I would say is from a legal point of view, it may be legally appropriate that the two of them were not registered under the Lobbyist Registration Act. But what I would say is that we organization, we charity, there's no question in my mind that they should have been. And even in their testimony, they said that it wasn't like a substantial part of what they're doing, but that's not the test. The test is it 1/5 of an FTE, basically, even on a monthly basis working on it? There's no question. And when they said it took a handful of people to, basically do this $543 million proposal, I mean, certainly other groups, it takes them 6 months and, hundreds and hundreds, thousands sometimes of hours to put this stuff together. So I think that there's no question they should have been. Whether exactly who should have been registered is one issue. The other thing that's going to be a big issue for the commissioner is that if there isn't any impact, basically they just get to say, well, we filed these 65 plus reports and there's no other consequences, it's going to completely undercut the whole lobbyist registry system for charities. I think a lot of charities are going to say, we can pretty much meet with the government 60 times before anyone's going to, really say anything. And then if we get caught, we'll just file these things. So, I mean, I've heard of,
just in my final seconds, I know a lot of charities that registered to lobby, and they're going pretty much for contracts that are worth peanuts compared to what the Kielburgers were going for. That Craig could write directly to Bill Morneau and say, hey, Bill, how's your family? And ask for $12 million and get it 11 days later. That seems to me to be a pretty staggering insider track that I haven't seen anywhere else. Is that common in the charity circuit?
Oh, definitely not. Like I said, it can take years to get government money.
That's all I can give you, Mr. Bloomberg.
And thank you so much, Mr. Sweet. You're a wonderful man, despite what everyone says about you. I will have your back every day.
That was the agreement of the committee. Don't. Okay, Mr. Gourde, pour 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes, Mr. Gould, for 5 minutes. Well, I'll share my time with my colleague. I have just one question. We charity told us that they could organize young people, and they insisted that according to their data bank, they could see a lot, contact a lot of young people. Well, it would please any political parties because they don't have the capacity to find the young people. So perhaps could it be that they actually did this to give this list as a political advantage? I'm asking Mr. Gallant to start. Well, if it's speculation, what would prove it would be a public inquiry or a police inquiry. Well, or police investigation. I can think something, but the lawyer in me would say that we don't have any evidence, even though we have a reasonable doubt, but we don't have facts. Monsieur Blumberg.
Yeah, I would not know whether there was something of that sort. What I would know is this, that there are many charities that have tremendous capacity. And in fact, what we was doing was subcontracting much of the work to others anyway. I think there are lots of charities in Canada that could have done a job of pulling something together, subcontracting it. Essentially, when you say to a young person who's in university, you could get $5,000 by filling in a form, you don't really need to have an extensive network to get 40,000 people to apply. Okay, I mean, on Twitter and a few other things, it gets out there, and before you know it, within days, you'll have 40,000 people. You might have 400,000 people applying for the program. So I don't think they needed some of the skills that we did have, and they weren't doing rock concerts or anything like that. There were other skills needed that wasn't there, whether it was the French language skills or some of the governance issues or things like that. But I can't comment on. I am just concerned that with the information they collected, I don't know what's happened to it. I don't know with that and all this. They've talked about we shutting down, but then I see other indications they're still fundraising and doing things. So I'm really more confused than anything else.
I leave the rest. I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to my colleague, Chris Val.
I'd like to ask you your opinion in terms of why a charity would create a real estate shell company to ask the government to deposit these funds in. Is there a reason that you can ascertain as to why that was done?
Yes. I mean, first of all, let's remember when they applied for charity status, I think it was around 2019. This is long before COVID, CSSG and everything else. And why you might want to not have real estate in your operating company is for liability reasons. If there is a problem, you want to put it sometimes into a holding company. It's very commonly done with for-profit companies, when you think of how they operate, holding companies, operating companies, maybe multiple operating companies, things like that. So there's nothing wrong with that. And they said to CRA, this is going to be a holding company. It's going to hold about $40 million worth of assets. Then they flipped it around and switched it around, which is fine too. And they changed the objects. I don't know if they got CRA approval, but I just don't know. But they changed things so that it has broader purposes to be able to do other things. This was, I think, done in June of this year. And then it was being used for that. So that I don't think is untoward. What is weird is how they denied that it was ever a real estate holding company when it's so clear that it was. But then it was changed. So what was more, shall we say, unusual was that the government would agree to this. It's not that we would create a shell company. I mean, if I was going to ask that someone pay me $100 million, and I would also, it would be nice to say, and I'm going to set up a shell company so that then We Charity doesn't have any liability. But I've never, I wouldn't say never, can't recall a time when I've seen a government department give any amounts of significant money to a shell. There could be good reason to do it, but I'm just not seeing it here, and why they did it, I don't understand.
There's a lot of questions, including, do you see any legal impediment for this shell company to do business with me to we? So to ask that company, would there be any restrictions through this government contract? Was there anything that the government did to restrict whatever this shell company is that got the money to contract me to we to do some of this business, some of the work?
I haven't looked at the contract in a few months, but my off-the-top comment would be that, you know, we is a little bit of an integrated entity. So I don't think there was any references to the for-profit companies, but there are references to the other charity, non-profit sort of entities there. And those entities then could have, for example, tasked the for-profits potentially to do it. So in other words, this contract itself may not have, but there is no question that there could have been huge gains potentially.
I'm sorry, that's time is our enemy again. And so colleagues, just so you know, it's 3:03. We're just going to allow Mr. Nathaniel Erskine-Smith his round, and then Madam Goodrow her round, and then we'll do the business after that. It shouldn't take us too long. There's one motion and a budget that you've already all received. So Mr. Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. It's not easy to surprise me since I've been in politics since 2015, but here we are talking about the We Charity scandal on the last day of Parliament in December, and I'm a little bit surprised. Now, I was maybe the first one to criticize publicly as far as our Liberal Party goes, but there is some reason for criticism in terms of how this rolled out. The Prime Minister obviously acknowledged that there was good reason for criticism as the program was cancelled. I personally thought Canada Summer Jobs was one way of going, but of course, different conception of the program. The government saw a way of engaging young people in a more serious way, whereas I took a more employer-centered view. I first want to get some of the facts straight in my head because I have not been part of the proceedings. But Mr. Blumberg, when you say it was a grant of $543 million, you're not in fact saying that We Charity was to receive $543 million. You recognize, in fact, that most of that was going to go to the students, right?
Well, no. Well, let's start off with We Charity was actually not going to get any money under this grant. It was the Liberal Party announced, first of all, a $912 million. I'm talking about their announcement. If you look at their what they announced, $912 million to We Charity. But in fact, that was completely not correct. It was actually $543 million to We Charity Foundation. And how much of that they could have kept was about $43.5 million.
Right. Yeah. So in your opening testimony, when you said it was a $543 million grant to We Charity, in fact, it was a much smaller number that would have flowed specifically to We Charity.
No. If you could have, first of all, I want to agree with you. Canada Summer Jobs, great program. Let's double it, okay? It's a fantastic
Well, you might agree
program.
With me a second time, though, and that most of the money would have flowed directly to students.
No, not directly. It would have gone to We Charity, and then We Charity, at their discretion, would have doled it out to students, which is a position of tremendous power that I concerned any one charity has that level of power. I'm a little
But you ultimately do acknowledge that it wasn't $443 million that would ultimately have ended up in We Charity's bank account.
No, it was not $543 million that We Charity, if they did the program, would have got to keep. But the amount.
So it may be that I misheard, or it's possible you misspoke. But either way, it's not. And so you are right, though, that parliamentary committees often are not the most efficient. But in fairness, parliamentary committees in this case receive thousands of documents. I reviewed some of the emails and correspondence between officials. Did you review those same emails and correspondence between officials before your testimony today?
I was never provided with those documents, and if you want to provide me with documents, I'm happy to look at them.
Well, I wasn't provided with them either, but I did read the news, and I did read the emails.
Oh, I've read
that are public.
And things like that, absolutely.
And in those excerpts, you would have seen, I think, from public officials, and I hope, saw the witness testimony in these proceedings before testifying yourself, but certainly you saw representatives from ESDC say in their own words that it was their recommendation, and they did in fact think this organization was best placed to deliver the program.
I have seen that, and I also believe there was a little issue of there wasn't some disclosure to some of the committees about certain meetings. But the point is, I agree. That is what ESDC is saying. And if that is correct, then what I'm saying is there's a bigger problem that will not be solved by Mr. Morneau leaving. We have a problem of ESDC's due diligence capacity is not at the standard that it needs to be at.
Have you spoken to anyone who was engaged to work in this program?
I don't know what you mean by engaged to work with the program.
Well, there were lots of teachers engaged to work in this program. I've spoken to a number of them. Have you?
I've spoken to teachers who've done certain things, but I haven't spoken to specific teachers who were engaged on this program, no.
Okay, so can you name another organization in this country that was so very connected with, say, the Toronto District School boards in Saskatchewan, school boards in Alberta, and as a matter of engaging young people, to encourage that young people were actively participating in this program, name, I don't know, say, 2 charities that have such an engagement with school boards?
First of all, the question is a bit, it's not really correct, because we're not trying to get high school students to get this grant. This was really geared towards university students, is my understanding. So again, I mean, otherwise you could have gotten kindergarten teachers to get involved as well. But the fact is, look at groups like
so
the United Way,
teachers in high school clearly have
YMCA, lots of different organizations have tremendous capacity in Canada to do tremendous work. In fact, I think you should be asking ESDC this question, because they have actually
My last question is this. So I've read the Bastrash report recently. It's Broken Dreams, Broken Lives, okay? It talks about a toxic work culture in the RCMP and calls for an independent commission of inquiry into the future of the RCMP. And it is an incredibly serious ask. You are coming before this committee, and for a program that never got off the ground, the dollars never ultimately were delivered, that there is no money in the end that is going to be expended by this federal government for a program that there was an apology and significant thousands of documents of disclosure. You are calling for a similar public inquiry.
Absolutely. Mr. Erskine Smith, I think you've been one of the most forthright Liberals I've seen talking about this issue. But I'll tell you, after hearing, first of all, so much of this information could be provided in about 1 day by the Liberal Party, the government, and We Charity. Like, for example, I don't know, have you reviewed Medewe's financial statements, which is very big, important issue in terms of where money is going? Because I haven't, and I don't think they're public. This could be disclosed in 5 minutes. So if you want to know why we need a public inquiry, it's because certain parties are not providing the information that can so easily be provided if they wanted to provide it. That's the only reason we need it. Provide the information by tomorrow, and there won't be a problem.
Blumberg. So, sorry. Our last questioner now, Madam Goodrow, for 2.5 minutes.
2 minutes 30.
2.5 minutes, gentlemen. We can get this done. So I've learned so much in what you said, the need for monitoring, that we keep going, that we always keep in sight our integrity programs. And now what are we faced with? We're faced with, in a few weeks, we'll get the commissioner's report. And now he's watching us. So please know that everything you say is very useful. And when it's been 42 times you talked about the public inquiry, or maybe even just 12 times, that we need to change the situation, it does bring us to question how we're financing a party. When we say that in Quebec, we did reduce that to avoid the appearance of a conflict. And then when we hear talk about a conflict of interest, this is a gift, but it's also an advantage of what might happen in the future. And earlier, when I heard Mr. Scott, I didn't let you speak, but you spoke a lot earlier. And when you said that gratuity corresponds to what I have in return, we know that in the technology environment, if you don't buy a product, then you are the product. And if you're not aware, watch Social Dilemma on Netflix. I watched it with my kids. And they clearly told me, they said, where are we going? And why? That's why we need those control measures. They're unequivocal. And now I heard names of countries. I heard propositions. So I really have everything I need to turn around and tell all of my colleagues that there's an emergency. And we do agree that at this point, the elements just keep spouting off elements that cannot be proved, and we're still wondering who's right and who's wrong. So in a few words, I am going to let you speak. And I think, Mr. Blumberg, that you were not quite done when we were talking about different countries and that Canada was far behind in demonstrating that things are done properly.
If you take a look, if you go to a site in America called GuideStar, and GuideStar has the 990 forms for each of the American 501c3s that have to file that. You can see sometimes it's 100 pages, 200 pages of material. It's a lot of material, lots of questions. Our Canadian charity returns about 9 pages, and most charities are filling in about 2 or 3 pages worth of stuff, which is very little stuff. And in the end, I think that I'm doing it because I think that it's good for the charity sector to have more questions. Like, I'll give you an example. There's no questions on volunteers, which are very important. So the T3010 gives too much preference to financial, makes big charities in terms of budget look big, but little charities with $100,000 and 1,000 volunteers can be very important charities. So I think that it'll be a more fair form if we ask more questions. And even if they're voluntary questions or they're done on alternate years or whatever to keep the burden in check. But the amount of time it takes to fill in the 990, I understand, is about 10 times longer than it takes to fill in the T3010.
Thank you, Mr.
And I'm not
Blumberg.
saying we should follow the Americans. I'm saying we should just look and see what others are doing and learn from it.
Thank you very much to all.
Beaucoup à vous, messieurs. C'est très précieux.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yes, Mr. Angus, point of order.
I am so glad to see Mr. Erskine-Smith back at our committee. He hasn't been here in 2 years, but I feel he should have been here in July because his testimony, he would have been the top student in July, but he hasn't read any of the documents since then. So if he wants, I could give him a tutorial on the meetings of April 17th, what happened in those meetings. The meeting on May 3rd email where Wernick says that she's happy to go along with we if that's what Minister Chagger wants to, because ultimately it's her choice. I really want to work with Erskine-Smith on so much, so I'm offering to spend Christmas. Other people can join us. We can set up a special tutorial and I could walk him through the documents, because I think I'm the only one who's read all 5,000 of them.
Now, I've only been a chair of this committee for a short period of time, but we're going to create a reward for the person who can milk a point of order the most. That will be Mr. Angus for certain. But colleagues, let me excuse our witnesses. Again, Monsieur Gallant, Mr. Blumberg, Mr. Scott, thank you so much for your in-depth testimony. All three of you. I'm actually going to read the blues of this meeting again because it was very informative in many different dimensions. So thank you. You can certainly log off now. We just have some committee business to deal with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Colleagues, we can avoid going in camera if I think all the budget was distributed to you. It's just for some basic things so that we can get testimony from witnesses. If there's no disagreement, I'll consider that the budget is unanimously passed. Do we have consent on that? See lots of thumbs up. Thank you very much. Okay, Madam Clerk, you're good to go on that regard. And now, as promised, Mr. Erskine-Smith, I give you the floor.
Thanks very much. And before I move the motion, I've spoken to Michael and also briefly with Charlie. I have not had a chance to speak with Block colleague, but in relation to C11, I'm not going to move any motion on C11. I just hope there's just a common understanding that I hope to be a more permanent member of the EPI committee as we head into the new year, as C11 is ultimately referred to us, and so that we take advantage of January as much as we reasonably can to just that there's some broad consensus that we'll work offline to develop a work plan and witness list so that we can hit the ground running in a collaborative way when we get back. So I just wanted to put that out there and hope there's broad consensus for that. But specifically, you all have noticed and we have heard, I think we have all read the horrifying stories in relation to the failure of Pornhub and MindGeek to take down illegal content in a timely way. And where it has seriously damaged lives, and women's testimony very clearly in media reporting has indicated that they have not been able to come back to a way of living a normal life because of the damage of those videos and images that have been shared. So as I provided notice, I move that the committee call representatives of Pornhub and MindGeek, namely Ferris Antoon and David DeCillo, to explain the company's failure to prohibit rape videos and other illegal content from its site, and what steps it has taken and plans to take to protect the reputation and privacy of young people and other individuals who have never provided their consent.
Okay, colleagues, I suspected from those I had spoken with that there's pretty much agreement on this and not much debate, but Madame Goodrow, did you want to weigh in?
Oui, en fait.
Yes, perhaps it was the interpretation. There was a notice of motion, and now we have to make an agreement. I heard someone say my name, but the communication really wasn't very okay. I don't want you to repeat it. Could you explain what's happening?
Mr. Erskine Smith is actually filling in for Mr. Dong, so he moved that motion now that the two owners of Pornhub / MindGeek be called before the committee. So obviously, I'm going to open it up to debate, but like I said, I only mentioned at the beginning that there seemed to be agreement with the colleagues I spoke with that we would like to do this when we get back. Comprendre, madame?
J'ai bien compris, mais
I understood, yes, but since I wasn't aware of this, I have to think about this and take a few moments to consider this, of course. So if there was any documentation, of course, I'm going to have to read it, because I'm really just caught completely off guard here. So I can't make any decision at this time.
Send a motion to you, Madam Goodrow. It was tabled before the committee, a notice of motion a couple of days ago, but we're going to send it to you right now. And I have two other hands up, so we'll deal with those two hands while you're taking a look at the motion, Madam Goodrow. Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you so much. I thank my colleague for stepping forward with this. I had been looking at this issue in terms of something that maybe we would have looked under Bill C-11 in terms of privacy rights. But I think the shocking news that we've seen, and shocking news internationally that's come out, that Canada is home to a company that has been accused of hosting child pornography, revenge porn, non-consensual acts that have destroyed lives. It is something our committee needs to take very seriously. I think we need to bring the owners of Pornhub with us. I think we need to find out a way to allow some of the survivors of this horrific abuse to speak to us if they're willing. Maybe, and if that's the case, and we don't have to debate that now, but perhaps a safe forum for them to testify, even if they didn't want to testify in public, but that they could provide that testimony to us. I think we should be making that offer so that we know what the real life impacts are. One of the other issues that concerns me, that it draws to a broader issue that Mr. Erskine Smith and I dealt with to some degree in the last Parliament, are the safe harbor provisions. The safe harbor provisions that allow large tech giants to be legally absolved from some content that is extremely destructive. In the past, we dealt with the content that was extremist, racist violence that has led to people being hurt and killed in other jurisdictions. But the safe harbor provisions, you have to go after the person who posted it, which is not always easy. I think if we had no safe harbor provisions for sites that post sexual violence, non-consensual attacks on children, and they were liable, that content would be down immediately and it wouldn't get up there. So I think our committee can look at this. I don't think it needs to be a big study. I think we need a study that reports to Parliament. I think we could do this in a couple of meetings and get, I think urgency is important. I think we need to vote on it today so that we're ready in February for this. I would like to maybe suggest 2 meetings and then a report. We could have more if we need, but I think this is the kind of thing our Parliament needs, our committee needs to be able to report to Parliament with recommendations that we can move on very quickly. And as for Mr. Erskine-Smith's other suggestion about January, I certainly am very interested in talking about witnesses for C11 because I think this is going to be a very, very important study. So I make myself available as long as we're not, you know, maybe more informally as a subcommittee where we could just actually just talk through some of this and find a way to get ourselves oriented for February. So that's those are my comments, but I'm definitely ready to vote on this now.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Barrett.
Yep, thanks very much, Chair, and welcome to Mr. Erskine-Smith. Only had the opportunity to be on committee briefly for a few appearances during Justice last year, and so looking forward to it. Yeah, we have to take meaningful action to protect prevent child abuse and sex trafficking victims, and when these abuses are documented in video and then put online, and they're there forever. Once they're online, as we saw with reports in the New York Times, there's no getting them back, and so there is. It's very concerning that we're home. We have the distinction of being home to this organization, and certainly they should come and appear before committee. And so Conservative members are prepared to support the motion and move swiftly to a vote. And with respect to preparations for looking at government legislation, I think an informal working group to get witnesses and a timetable worked out and present that to the committee is something that I'm definitely open to assisting with. So we can circle back on that offline. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Madam Goodrow.
Oui, alors j'ai fait.
Okay, so I've done my homework. Thank you. I read it. I understood that is a replacement of Mr. Dong's motion. We're probably just all tired. Thank you to the interpreters, but I really had missed parts of it. So what I understood is that we're going to vote on it today for when we come back. And that's the piece that I hadn't understood. So now I read it. I have been able to listen to you. And I continue to have great vigilance for anything that deals with videos, especially children's videos. That's something that's I really care about. We cannot forget that the reason for our meeting today, because life goes on, we have to deal with everything that's falling upon us. But what we've just heard at the committee is something that we ought to be able to do a full read of together. I think there's a way to improve things in terms of the structure. When I hear about things that happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it's still the same today, and Quebec and Canada, well, Canada, actually, I should say, is way behind, and in terms of protection of personal information, that has an impact on international trade. This is something that really gets to me. I don't know, maybe not you, but I see that it's urgent, and we see the urgency. We require transparency. We have to be sure that our people are properly protected, and that's part of protection. So I am ready to vote, without forgetting that we have a lot of work ahead of us, and I am ready to do 2 and 3 times the work, because people deserve us. They deserve to have us work harder for their betterment. Thank you, Ms. Goodrow.
Translates okay, but thanks for setting the bar high for us, high standard. Colleagues, so going back to Mr. Angus's comment, I was thinking just exactly that, and if you'll give me that latitude in this motion, we'll reach out. There are a couple of the young ladies who have made their, I believe they've been public in their statements. We'll reach out to them, and it would be, to me, advantageous to have their testimony first, because then we'd have sworn testimony before the committee that we could refer to when we get the characters from Pornhub/MindGeek before us. If you will give me that latitude, then I'll work on that for the 2 meetings that Mr. Angus had suggested. Is there consensus around that? And just one last thing, I think we have unanimous consent as well in regard to the motion. Is that clear as well, colleagues? Okay, then I think that's might be our first unanimous vote. So, thank you very much, colleagues.
Nathaniel Erskine Smith, the great consensus builder.
Yeah,
you just haven't had me on the committee.
Yeah, geez, look at that. You wouldn't have given us 40 days of filibuster. But Chair, just on that motion, are we reporting this to Parliament? I didn't know if I remember seeing it, but I want to make sure that we have a report to Parliament in that motion.
It's not in the motion, but again, if it's consensus that we report it back to the Parliament, then I certainly see consensus right now in the nods and thumbs up in the faces. So I don't see any. No, there's no resistance to that. So we consider that we will do the meetings as well as do a report.
Thanks all, and
Thank you.
Charlie, I look forward to spending Christmas with you reading 5,000 emails.
You're gonna be so well schooled by the time you're done.
Thanks all, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, we have such a kind clerk. She keeps saying to me, remind them that we are televised. So
yeah,
so colleagues,
that's okay.
Have a very Merry Christmas. There is no agreement in regards to virtual meetings, so our next meeting will be back when the House does sit again. But I take the time to have some rest. Obviously, we're going to have some back and forth in regards to emails and the upcoming C11. I welcome that as well. But be safe, spend some time with your family as far as the local laws are concerned, and see you back in 2021. Bonne année. Joyeux Noël.
Bonne année. Bonne année.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And take care of yourselves.